Hello everyone. It's a great honor for me to be the first one to share some thoughts of mine, and to be in this beautiful little town, Verbier. It's my first time in Switzerland, and several months ago when Philip mentioned the topic of the summit to me, I was like, gosh, there's definitely a lot to talk about. Because a quarter-life crisis, I was there, who wasn't, right? And but actually, in China, there's a famous saying from Confucius. It's called 四十不惑. It means that when you reach the age of 40, you'll no longer be confused anymore. But I am 40 right now. I turned 40 like a few months ago. But I really beg to differ from what Confucius said. So 40 years old hasn't made me sober at all. I'm getting more and more confused with the world today. I guess a lot of people have the same feeling, right? So, but I mean, the crisis is not always something bad. And my crisis is far from over. And I think probably that's one of the reasons I got invited. And I think the confusion is also could be a motivation, and I always wanted to do something through art to solve them, to address those confusions. Some are distant, some are nearby. So this is the title. Yeah, so my recent work is called The Second Interrogation. It's a two-parts video installation, so I'm not going to talk too much about the work. Actually, I'll try to talk about something behind them. So it's sort of inspired by my personal experience, and explore my nearby confusion, like how critical art can exist with the censorship, and whether art has an enlightening significance in the change of society. So actually, everything starts from my first encounter with a censor in China. It was many, many years ago, and it was during a public talk, just like this one. And before I get on the stage, the organizer came to me and whispered to me. He said, "Just look at that man, middle-aged, sitting in the front and holding a glass of water. That man is from the national security. Just be careful what you're gonna say." So that was my first encounter, and I still remember that was a little bit difficult for me to concentrate throughout the whole lecture. I had to think ahead all the sentences that was about to come out of my mouth, and I stumbled over empty words. Look at the man sit there, everything looks so ordinary, but so strange, I still remember that feeling. But later in the years, actually, I had a lot of experience dealing with this kind of situation. I met up with encounter with a lot of different senses, and some of them, 2 or 3 of them, they are like familiar faces, and they pretend to be my fans, and they came for an autograph with a catalog of mine, and they could ask very professional questions during the Q&A section, because they followed your practice. And 2 or 3 of them, I don't think they know that I know who they are. So it was like a funny relationship, right? So 2 or 3 of them, we became WeChat friends, the Chinese social media, like Chinese WhatsApp. And the funny thing is they always like my posts, and they always retweet them. And but my post sometimes it's like a very like a blunt criticism about the society. So I was confused about their position. I was like, as censors, their job was to delve into our world and to observe all kinds of different art activities, shows, artworks, to check them day by day and year after year, much more than I can do. And I was wondering if there's just one moment, maybe just one moment, some kind of a true art could pierce the reality of this and to make them question the belief they have worked for. So that's basically that's the inspiration of this project. Yeah. So this is the piece, the second interrogation. So it's about a funny relationship between a censor and an artist. And so actually, the first part of this piece is, I imagined a sort of seemingly extreme scenario, but actually, I think it's also quite realistic to me. The censor becomes the artist because he realizes the enlightening significance of art in a totalitarian state, and also the artist becomes the censor because we have a lot of cases of that in China. The artist is a little bit much more into nationalism or the utopia of rules, and they have a lot of debates and they have a lot of conversations. But the key point of the transformation of their identity, is actually about two historical moments in China. The 1999 China Avant-Garde Exhibition, which was a milestone in the Chinese contemporary art history, and the student democracy movement that swept across the country in the same year. Yeah, so they have a lot of talks. And so actually, I think the China Avant-Garde exhibition becomes a metaphor of the democracy movements. They all plays as a turning point of the Chinese contemporary history and destiny. So in the second part, the ghosts of two deceased artists, one is a fictional, one is in real life. They're engaged in a conversation. It's about my relatively distant confusion. So it's about how we can recognize the frustration of China's entry into the modernity in early 20th century, and whether we can see those hidden reputations of the China's past revolutions and to reimagine a new form of resistance. So this is a May 4th movement. So the May 4th movement in 1919 is considered to be the China's modern enlightenment, the entry point of the Chinese enlightening movement, or the process of modernity. So that was about this time, but in last century, the Chinese youth and also the young country itself, they were going through their quarter-life crisis. They were fighting for democracies and liberty. This is a photo I like a lot, and this is a photograph taken by American photographer Sidney Gamble during the movement in 1919. So in the classroom in Peking University, so a bunch of tired students during the movement were captured in a moment of a shock by this sudden intrusion of the photographer. They're like looking into the camera. So it has a very strong impact on me for many years. Every time when I look at this photo, it's like this group of young men. They're looking at me outside the photo, as if they're asking me questions. 100 years later, it's like what have they gained for their sacrifices, and have the dreams they fought for had already become something that a nightmare already. So I tried to recreate this moment in a piece of mine. Yeah, I can play this. Do I have the sound for this? Yeah, thank you.
瞬间，扭对了头颈，灵魂就此飞离紧张的身躯。时间不再是线性的，而是大于旁的事，搿制造着反起个无数的，的确自己生存在个虚无时空之中，积累并解析自己的一生。
Yeah, so yeah, I was like asked questions by this young people from 100 years ago, and I also like to ask the same question to the audience. So by this piece, so actually, I remember a news I read about an earthquake somewhere in China many years ago. The geologists said that this is not a new earthquake, but actually there was an aftershock of another old earthquake that happened 200 years ago. So I just, that made me realize that, the people there in that area has been living inside the earthquake that hasn't stopped yet. And they haven't have a clue, right? So, I mean, compared with the geologic time, the brevity of life in the generations, they're just so short, and preventing us from realizing that we might just still stuck in, the aftershock of a history that we thought is over long ago. So, yeah, so actually this piece is from a project I focused on from 2018 to 2021. It's called the Northeast Strategy, so which is attempt to look at this 100 years of frustration of China's modernity process as a moment of geology. So, yeah. So this project, it begins in my hometown, the northeast part of China, a region that has countless entanglements with East Asian countries and in recent history. So I wanted to rethink the modernity, so what we call the rapture of modernity. So there's a classic discourse in the Chinese intellectual history that describes this. So it's called salvation overwhelmed enlightenment. It means that under the pressure back then, 100 years ago, under the pressure of colonial expansion of external world, the nationalist salvation was the priority of the whole country, and the enlightenment of liberation and democracy got overridden. So, but which is interesting to me more is whether the salvation or enlightenment itself, these two seemingly contradictory action, they did not only exist at the same time, but they also came from the same source, the West. So the salvation actually is to save the country from a colonial colonization of the Western world, and the enlightenment actually is to learn from the Western thoughts. So the West as an external object seems to be the cause of tearing the social process apart. But however, in my work, I like to try something, explore something alternative. Maybe the possibility there's something potential of the dilemma of East Asia. It's not that, nationalist explanation could be also something inward. So, I don't think I have time for this part. But so what are exactly the dilemmas of East Asia, and how do they resonate? So also in the Northeast strategy, in the third chapter, it's called Tongas. So by confronting two historical trauma in China and also in Korea, I try to dismantle this so-called dilemma of East Asia by using the Civil War as a metaphor. So in 1948, in my hometown, Changchun, so a tragedy, a very sensitive historical moment, which is not impossible, which is impossible to be mentioned in China to this day, took place. It's called the Siege of Changchun. So it was an important part of the Northeast campaign during the Civil War, Chinese Civil War in 1948. And the communist forces, actually, they tried to capture the city by besieging it, by military besieging it for more than half a year. So during which, food or supply or nothing can get in or out. And hundreds of thousands of people, they just died in starvation. So I've thought of minor ways to how to approach into this, very sensitive history. And during my research and fieldwork, actually, I discovered something even more hidden. So in this so-called civil war, but at those important juncture of the siege, that was actually the Korean troops, So it was something astonished to me. And but those Korean troops actually, they originally went to China during the 1930s. They formed an independent division to fight against the Japanese. But the reason why they were using Korean troops, alien troops, was because before, both the besieging troops and the civilians, they were Chinese, and they were even fellow townsmen. So the brutal strategy was impossible to carry it out. But by using alien troops, alien troops was like a man-made Babel, and unable to communicate without mercy. I also remember that it was about the same time in another part of Asia, Jeju Island in Korea. Something tragic and also something almost identical to the siege of Changchun took place. It's called the Jeju April 3rd uprising. So both of its tragedy were tons of citizens got caught up amidst these two civil military confronting, or we can say this civil opposite battle of ideologies, and they were perished. And both of these cases, it's impossible to be mentioned today in these two countries, was because they essentially questioned the legitimacy of the current regime in both countries. So, the synchronicity of these two tragedy actually is linked up in my work through these two Korean soldiers in the siege of Changchun. They want to escape from the absurd and the tragic city and to go back to their hometown, Jeju Island, to save their family who also caught up in the same tragedy and the absurdity. But they just keep getting lost, and they can't find a way out. And as if they're in a labyrinth of which they cannot escape. And they gradually realize that the geography of the mountains and the rivers are distorting, and the Changchun eventually becomes Jeju. So if you cannot escape the tragedy of Changchun, that means you cannot escape the tragedy of Jeju. Yeah, so I remember when Anneliek asked me earlier if I can write something as a quote for the summit. With a little thought, I replied that was my title, My Battle Includes Yours. So I intuitively felt that this was like a hidden thread of my practice or actions over the years. So how to summon the past to save the present, and how to connect with each other through understanding oneself. So although my creations are mainly about the history of China or East Asia, but I know that under the current situation of global politics with increasing obstacles, we cannot understand our own issues in isolation. So last year, I had a chance, I went to Germany to have a show of the second interrogation, and also I went to Documentary Institute to have a seminar about the China's censorship, cultural censorship, and the new forms of democracy movements. And I was astonished by how much inspiration we can get for each other. So these two in-depth exchange just made me realize that, although we're facing different social issues and dilemmas, but actually they're all connected in some way. So as I talk about my experience dealing with the censorship in China, my German friends, they responded with the inspirations regarding with how they could deal with ideological controls or cancellations, which are more and more visible in their lives. So, and this is vice versa. So the issues we have, there has so many entanglements, just like a quantum. Maybe we just cannot solve them in isolation. So there's one last example I loved for years. It's a great example for my battle includes yours. So this is in the 1960s, but it's in another part of Asia. It's in Japan, in Okinawa. That was also about the time of Vietnam War. So back then, the Okinawa people, they were fighting against the Japanese government for their own independence by fighting against the US military in Japan. And the Okinawa activists, they were like very creative. They went to the US air base in Okinawa to disrupt the takeoff of a US helicopter. So when they were asked why they would do so, so they answered, if they could prevent the US military helicopter from taking off 1 hour later, the Vietnam guerrillas will have 1 more extra hour to prepare for battle. So I think this is exactly the situation we're in right now. We're like all caught up in different ones, but actually my battle includes yours. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.